We rocking?
Okay, so you want to introduce everybody? Introduce them?
Yeah, first of all, thank you guys for coming and being here. Today we have Chuck Wiersum from Home Inspection Services of Michigan, the gentleman in the orange, and then Nathan Vandenburg from All Things Septic in that awesome neon linen. Thank you so much for agreeing to give this presentation. We're really happy to have you. We're really excited to learn this information because we do realize how important it is.
Yes. So, first of all, any burning questions that anybody has on wells or septics, anything that's... Sue?
Is the state of Michigan looking at standardizing wells and septics throughout the state of Michigan? I heard there was a law that it was being played around with.
So Michigan has their standard of septic system and well, and then each county has their own set of standards, and they're usually surpassing the state standards by a leap. For example, the seasonal high water table isolation from the bottom of stone in Kent County is 24 inches, but the state's code is 12 inches. So the state is always more lenient than the counties.
Okay, so I have heard that they're looking at passing legislation in the state to get this situation we're talking about today under control.
Yes, and they've always been trying to do that. The reason is because they're getting appeals from different contractors and people that have failed septic systems to the state to try to get the state's code to pass in the county level. To make the septic system smaller, less isolations from seasonal high water table, and so on. So yes, state's more lax, counties are more difficult to deal with. So you can appeal a permit typically. It's usually a very difficult process, but you can appeal it to the state, and the state will usually grant it over time.
So what I'm hearing from you, Nate, is they pass something with the state, if things go like they have been, it actually would be more lenient, not a tougher standard that we would like to see.
Correct, it would be a more lenient standard, correct. And we have the Great Lakes, so we're a state that takes pride in that. And so wastewater is one of those aspects that contaminates the lakes. It's not the biggest one by far, but it is one of those aspects.
There's a legislation that is out there periodically, I've heard about it recently again, is making mandatory septic inspections across the state every 3 years. This legislation comes up and dies about every 3 years.
Yes. Also with pumping, they've been trying to make that where every house has to have their septic pumped every I believe it's 3 years. It's just never happened.
I got a question.
Yes.
So I went yesterday and took one of my buyers to check the house out, and they have the septic tank. On the disclosure, it said it was pumped October 2022, and then additional drain fields lines added April 23rd or 2023. So if we end up writing the offer and get everything together and they win, we still have to get that stuff looked at again.
It should be inspected, it wouldn't need to be pumped at this point.
Okay.
But inspections, I would still have done.
Okay.
I have one thing that I'd like to, maybe you guys probably will cover with your presentation, but we just have an instance where we were dealing with pump versus not pump. Some people say, well, we were talking with this agent, she said that she was told that it was better not to have the septic pump because they couldn't see obstructions on the
Yeah, they wanted it pumped after the visual inspection.
That's just the opposite. If anyone that I've done an inspection for, I also own Well and Septic Inspections LLC, so just so we're clear of all the different companies here. I want the tanks pumped before I get there. In fact, most of the time I show up with the pumper. Nate and I have been working together for what, 3-4 years now, something like that. I show up for every pumping, whether it's Nate or whether it's plumbers or whether it's Schultz or whoever it might be. I'm there when the tanks are pumped out. Number one, I want to see the working level. I want to see the levels in the tank when I get there. You know, are they at a proper level? Are they blowing the lids off? And we have had situations where we've taken the dirt off and the lid has literally blown off.
All the above.
That's a mess. So, in answer to your question, I want the tanks pumped either before I get there or make arrangements for me to be there as the tanks are being pumped.
So what's another reason why you do that, Chuck?
Basically, it's because I can't see the entire tank. I want to see the sides, I want to see the bottom, I want to see what's going on with that tank. We have had several tanks that have blown out through the sides. Found several tanks that have had football-sized holes in the sides of them. And if the tanks aren't pumped, I can't see that. You know, I can't inspect what I can't see. So, Nate, you want to do a brief primer on septic systems?
Yeah, so think of it as on-site wastewater. We're getting rid of water, obviously. The main things we see in tank failures are going to be due to a water softener routed into, and I don't mean the entire water softener, there's a regeneration line that routes off the top of the water softener. This has become an issue, and this is why we replace tanks so often everywhere. What that does is it creates three problems inside the tank. It rots the tank out because concrete and salt don't mix. That's why we put different types of calcium chloride on our sidewalks. That's why you'll see sidewalks that are full of little pops of holes on the top. That's because salt eats concrete. The second thing it does, it creates a buoyancy issue inside the tank because saltwater things float different than they do in fresh water. So it tends to suspend the solids that are designed to get on top and then break down quickly and land on the bottom and build up. So it tends to suspend things in the tanks a lot more. What did I cover? I covered buoyancy, and bacteria is also killed by salt water. Bacteria is what a septic system lives on. When things go down the toilet and the drain, bacteria is what's eating those and creating that process of turning it more into water than into solids. So those three things are why tanks fail. You'll have cracks in tanks, and there's also different isolated incidents where tanks are just not put in right. They tend to settle and they crack. That's also possible, but typically it's because of a water softener in the tank. The drain field is also affected by the water softener, the salt water. It kills the bacteria in the tank. A lot of times we are seeing these septic systems, especially in the Ada area, where they used a concrete pipe as opposed to what we use now, PVC. And we're seeing a lot of the concrete breaking down because of that salt water that gets into the drain field and rots that concrete down also. We don't typically see that outside of Ada and Cascade. That's where we see the most of those types of pipes.
Where's the pipe, from the house to the septic?
No, this is going to be in the drain field, those pipes. Anything from the house to the tank is either going to be cast iron, Orangeburg, which is a tar paper pipe, or it's going to be PVC. Those are the three types of pipes we see between the tanks and also from tank to the house. So the drain field is where they use those concrete pipes. And again, that's mostly in Cascade and Ada, which that affects you guys.
Mm-hmm.
That's your big area, I'm sure. So we'll have a septic system that water's not going down it, but we're not seeing big green grass, luscious grass growing above the septic system. Water's not even getting to the septic system because these pipes are collapsed. So,
Is that what happened to that house in Rector?
Rector.
That was,
That's the one where we had the tanks way out in the field.
Oh, no, that was Orangeburg, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was Orangeburg. But there was a collapse between the tank and that new drain field. Because
Yes.
water wasn't getting to the new drain field.
Correct, yes, that's right, yeah. So that pipe is very susceptible to collapsing also, but not because of the salt water. We cannot find those pipes, we can't trace those pipes because our poking rods go right through them. They're just that weak.
Don't even feel them.
Don't even feel it, you just go right into it, and now you got a hole right through your pipe going out there. We don't even know it. It wouldn't be something we'd even
So are
find.
you suggesting that if you have a septic system not to have water softeners?
No, water softeners are great. The regeneration line that comes off the top of the water softener needs to be routed out of the septic system, because plumbers, when they come in, I'm not talking about plumbers waste group, I'm talking about the plumbers. They come in and they have to get rid of that regeneration line, and the first thing they do, and the easiest thing to do, is to dump it into the septic system, because you got a pipe going out into the yard, and so that's where 90% of them go, and it's causing all kinds of...
where should they go, Nate?
So what we do is we build an actual drain field in the yard for it. and we route it outside of the house into a pipe that goes down underneath and create a mini drain field for just that water. It can run out, there's no stipulation on it. It can run out into the yard. The problem is it typically kills grass because of the salt water. So some of these water softeners are putting 200 gallons a month down. Some of these more high efficiency ones are putting a lot less. So
How, is there any way to look at it and know, or do you have somebody come out and inspect it to know if that's even happening?
you can look at it, say this is your water softener. Right on the back of the water softener, there's gonna be a little white pipe. Usually it's clear, but most of the time it's white, and it's a bendable pipe. It's not a solid pipe. And it runs, and you usually run it right into the floor drain, which goes into a sump crock that kicks it up into the drain field. So if you follow that pipe, you'll know where it's going. That's how we find it. And it doesn't, I don't believe it stops a home sale. It just, if we go to work on the tanks, because of this water softener we routed in there, we'll have to route it out before the final inspection can be approved. So it creates a problem with, when we go look at a house, we almost have to now get in the house and verify that it is either routed in there or not. And then make a determination on where it has to go, and that obviously adds additional cost to a tank replacement.
So how much do these mini drain fields run, just a ballpark?
Every one is so different from the other. I typically tell people plan on between 1,000 and 2,000-ish, you know, depending on, some of them are finished basements. We have to try to get above drywall, and it's difficult to get them out of the house. But on unfinished basements, you can plan on it being a little cheaper and quite easier.
Since we have so many new agents, can you like do A to Z of what a septic is and why it is?
Sure. You would probably be the one to do that, or I can.
Go ahead.
Okay, so if you look at this first picture, right here. You've got everything coming from the house is supposed to go into the tank, all right? Now think of the tank more as a sediment tank, not as a holding tank. Because what we're doing, this is your bacteria surviving in this tank and creating an environment where it sends rich bacteria effluent into your drain field, which is all this stone with pipe in it. This is not a typical drain field, this is what's called a trench style system. It's very similar to what we do now, typically is more of a bed. So we'll have all of this green grass between here will all also be stone.
Okay, on the first page, is that more typical one? Do you have that page?
There you go, yeah.
Okay.
Look at that. That's more your tank. But, so you'll see these, okay, in Michigan, we don't have these baffles on the inlet side. Some other states, I think Indiana requires them on the inlet. We don't do that here in Michigan. We just dump it right into the tank.
What is the baffle?
These T things right here.
I'm not, the T's?
Yep, they're,
Those are baffles?
see how the pipe comes into the tank and then it drops down into the tank?
Mm-hmm.
If you look on the outlet side, this blue water here would be the area where the solids on top have been basically eaten by bacteria. The water then typically cleans out towards the center of the tank, and then it turns into sludge on the bottom of the tank. Whatever the bacteria didn't either eat, or it just becomes heavier and floats to the bottom of the tank. The baffle is designed to take the water from the center of the tank and send it out into the drain field. Because the water in the center of the tank is going to be a lot cleaner than the top or the bottom.
It keeps solids from getting out into the drain field from your tank.
Correct, yep. So all your toilet paper, everything that's floating on top, we don't want that going to the drain field because that clogs things up real fast. These will typically break off if they're either concrete or if they're, we see a lot of clay baffles, they'll typically snap off. So we put a one-piece PVC baffle in to replace that.
Okay, so now, that would be affected, that type of if it was concrete, it would be affected by salt from the water softener.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
So we typically see those baffles, and they used to do it back in the late 90s. They would incorporate the baffle into the precast of the tank. The salt water would eat the concrete, the baffle would fall off, creating a direct path for everything floating on top of the tank to get right into the drain field.
Oh my God.
So, and that's where you'll get an instant, not an instant, but a rapid failure.
So how does it go to the drain field? Through gravity?
Correct, yes. There's multiple different styles. You ever see these big mounds, or you know what a raised mound system is, right? So those are typically where we either can't get gravity because sand is at a certain elevation, or we've got clay and we need to elevate the sand above to put an evaporation system in. So those will typically go right into another tank with a pump in it. And that pump kicks it up if we can't get gravity or we don't need gravity. I'm sorry, if we don't, that's not the right way. If we need to push it up above, then we'll have a pump.
So when it's time for the inspection, you have to inspect all those tanks.
Right, and that's why we request that the pumpers open up the lid over the top of the baffle. So we want the baffle end of the tank opened. So,
There aren't baffles on both sides?
no, not on the inlet side, just on the outlet side.
This picture shows it, but that's not how Michigan is.
That's not how Michigan is.
Oh, okay. So we
Michigan,
don't-
all of our baffles are on the outlet side.
Okay.
And so basically, we use physics in order to get the water out of the tanks, in order to get the cleaner water out of the tank from the center. Those baffles go down typically, what, about 3 feet?
Yeah, 24 inches, yeah.
And so, your water level is up here, and the clean water's down here, because the physics water is going to push up through that baffle and then out into the next tank or out into the drain field. Because water's going to find its own level.
So when you say into the next tank, why would you have two tanks? What would the purpose of that be?
Doubles the filtration, doubles the bacteria buildup. Kent County requires it, whereas Noango County only requires one tank. Ottawa County, they typically require one tank on a smaller house, 2 tanks for sure on a bigger house. Kent County is getting a little bit more easy to work with these double, I don't think I've worked with a double compartment tank, but with you. But what we're putting in more and more is these big tanks with a divider in the center, giving us the 2 tank idea with a baffle in the middle, but yet still having a capacity versus putting 2 tanks in. And we'll typically do that if the system was installed on minimal gravity, because each tank needs 3 inches of drop. So if I come to a job where somebody ran the pipe almost level out to the first tank, almost level between the tanks, and almost level out to the drain field, that's great. That'll function, that'll work just fine. But when I come in, I have to set a tank, minutely close to that, which is very difficult to do, and you never do it right. That water level now might have 2 inches of drop in the first tank if I'm an inch off on a 7 foot tall tank, 7 foot in the ground. Maybe even the thing's 2 to 3 feet deep, I'm 9 feet in the ground. An inch makes a big difference if you have no gravity. So what we've been doing is putting a single tank in that still uses the 3 inches of drop, but yet has the dual capacity, the dual compartment. And they're cheaper, but they're a poly tank. Typically don't find them in a concrete tank.
So I've got a really dumb question. What does a septic system cost?
Ooh.
What does this even mean? You're talking, the repair for your example earlier was 1,000 to 2,000. Is this like a well cost, or is this $5 grand, 10 grand, 20 grand?
So,
Sold.
I did tanks, I think 88 Summer Wind, you were involved with that one, right?
Yeah.
I did tanks out there last week, I think. And I think we were at 6,400, and I was probably 1,500 cheap on it, because it was clay. I kind of thought it was sand. Clay makes everything much more difficult. So that was 6,400, I think, for that one. But I plan on 7,000 to 8,000 for a tank replacement.
Was that just one?
That was
one
both
tank?
tanks.
Yeah, that's not a drain, that's not a whole system, that's just a.
That's just a tank.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, your drain fields are gonna start with a tank, 'cause we typically do both of those together. It's very rare we'll hook up to the old tanks, because if the drain field's bad, it just transpires from there. So typically a drain field with tanks can start at 15,000, right, yeah.
Start?
Yeah, well, if it's, every situation is so different. If you have conventional if you can put a conventional system in, which is just a system in ground, which most of them have, it's a lot cheaper than me trucking 200 yards of 2.5 sand in at $9 a ton.
I got a question for you. When you start, when you replace the whole system, do you replace from the house? Or you just replace where the pipe comes at the house, at the tank and keep on going?
If they use substandard pipe, we'll typically go right up to the edge of the house. Anything 30 inches and in is gonna be a plumber's deal. We typically connect right at the house and go right out if they use substandard pipe. We'll run a camera up that line to determine if it's good, if we have good flow. We'll look at the side of the pipe, see if we have scum layer that moves. That'll tell us that the pipe is not level, it's doing this, and then we'll replace that. But most of the time, if there's good fall, there's no issues, we'll just cut it, put 2 new tanks in next to it, and then reroute it back into the drain field on a tank replacement. So we don't wanna do more work than we have to, so if the pipe is fine, we leave it.
Kind of a further answer to your question, if they have to do a mound system, starting at 20, 25?
Yeah,
What
we
is
go
that?
to 30s.
What is a mound system?
That's,
And I apologize, I'm a city
No,
guy.
no, you're fine, you're fine. That's why we're here.
I see the guy who lives in a septic tank.
hey,
That is exactly why we're here.
we're at our best when we're being asked questions, because we know you're paying attention. So.
I
So-
got another question.
What's
It might-
mound?
Mound system.
So a mound system is something that the health department says they'll work in a Walmart parking lot. What it does is it's designed to evaporate the air, the water into the atmosphere versus it going into permeable soils below. So what we would use a mound system for is like a clay site where we don't have, water doesn't run through clay like it has sand or gravel. So whenever you have clay, you've got to get rid of the water somewhere, so it goes up into the atmosphere, and it's basically a giant dome of sand with stone on top of it. So it's a drain field on top of a pile of sand. What it does, and the reason they're usually so much bigger, that is filled with water, and then the sun comes out and bakes it off. Creates heat, the sun comes out every day, bakes it off. That's typically how those work. So don't think of them as an evaporation system, if you will. And they might even be called that in the actual specs of it.
So there's 2 types then, the mound system and then the standard
Yep,
system?
there's gonna be a standard system where if we have permeable soils, sand, or loamy sand, that we can put the stone right in the ground and it'll run right into the ground. That's the easiest and cheapest way to get rid of water. Where we have clay, which Kent County is getting less and less sand sites to build on. So we're typically finding that people are building on more clay sites. We're seeing more of these raised mound systems. Another big thing, just because you have sand on a site does not necessarily mean you can have a conventional system, because in Michigan we have this little seasonal high water table, we call it. And it's not, we're not talking about the aquifers down below, we're talking about where the water hits the ground, it goes into the ground a certain amount before it slows down, and then it creates what we call modeling, which is basically deposits from the water, so iron and all this that gets stored in the water, creates modeling, and wherever that modeling layer is, and I think I told you guys wrong earlier, it's 24 inches is state code, I think 32 is Kent County's code. I said 12 inches, I didn't mean that. So Kent County requires the drain field, the bottom of the stone, say this is your stone, 32 inches to be between that distance. And what that does is it takes, I think, about a foot of sand to clean water. And they want to make sure the water is super clean before it gets into that stagnant water area where it kind of sits and slows down. So you'll find a perfectly sand site with high water table, well then the drain field has to go above that. So we bring sand in to accommodate that 32 inches in Kent County.
Yes, ma'am.
As agents, when we go to show a house and we're walking around a yard, the visible signs that we can see to know that it's a mound system is a hump of dirt
That's correct.
in the middle of nowhere.
That's correct, yeah.
And is there also like a post or something also in the yard where the pump has to plug in?
Yes.
Because I had one of those and I wasn't sure what it was.
Yes.
And I was told if that pump fails, septic backs up into the house.
Depends on the configuration, but that would be the assumption on most cases. So you're looking for something that looks like a berm, basically.
Right.
A big flat berm. And if you see a post in the yard with like a 4x4 or 4x6 treated post,
That's
with a
what I was
plug on
looking
it,
for.
yeah, you're gonna probably have a pressure system. You don't necessarily, that doesn't mean you have a big mound. You might have something to where the tanks were 2 feet underground because that's where it came out of the house. and the seasonal high water table was X, so the stone had to be above, and sometimes they'll be at grade, you won't even see a mound, but you'll have that post. And that's where the gravity is, to your question, a pump brings it up to whatever we have to elevate it to get it to accommodate.
And sometimes it's long distance. In fact, one on Pine Island that we had was, the drain field was actually 200 feet away,
Right.
and they had pumped the effluent the 200 feet to the drain field.
Is there a reason? I mean, is it better to be closer or far away? Is there a reason?
Just, that's the only
Just the
place, that's where
topography of the ground?
that's where they found sand.
Okay.
Closer's cheaper, but if you got sand far away, the offset of cost might warrant putting a pump in to get to that sand versus going with a real big raised mound. If you have clay by the house.
Sometimes when you're showing a house, guys, and you see the land's kind of flat, and all of a sudden your house is built up, and there's like a daylight window in the basement, and to the left there's a hill, that's probably a raised mound system.
Yeah.
So I was in a house back in early summer in Kentwood, and we were in the backyard. It was close to the fence. It was a pipe that was coming out, and it had like water sitting there. Was that just for like water to come out from the sump pump?
Very likely, it could even be from the gutters.
Oh,
If you have public water and sewer, it could be downspout drainage, or it could be from the sump pump. We see that a lot.
Yeah, as I was gonna say, probably gutters.
What is the minimum superficie you need for the tank and the field?
Say it again, I
The
was.
minimum superficie you need, like square footage, whatever it is.
So I think, and I rely on the county to do all the permits, so I just look at the permit. and
By
say-
average.
Yeah, it's a recipe for me. So I think in Kent County, it's 320 square foot of stone per bedroom. So typically, a 3-bedroom is 1,000 square feet, drain field is what they permit. Because we get some side area with the stone and so on, so they knock it down. And then it basically add 320 square foot per bedroom on top of that.
So if you add bedrooms, do you need to change your drain field then?
If Chuck catches you.
A lot of times we'll note on reports, tanks are small for the size of the house, drain fields are small for the size, drain field is working, but is small for the size of the house. I ran into one in Door the other day that they had about a less than 600 square foot drain field, had 7 people living in the house. System failed. Because there's just way too much water going into the system. It was a single tank system, and it almost, literally blew the top of the wood off the tank. But once the 7 people got out of the house, everything got pumped out, drained out. We looked into the drain field. The drain field stone was fine.
Yeah.
So the lady that was moving in, it's only 3 of them, it's herself and 2 kids, should be fine. And so that's how we wrote the report.
So on new construction, if you're buying a house and then you're planning to finish the basement, if you're not dealing with that and you're building the house, you might not get a permit to add another bedroom or a bathroom from the city or township.
That's correct.
Possible.
Yeah, so a lot of builders are gonna build the upstairs, finish it, and they're not gonna wanna put a bigger drain field in if somebody's buying the house someday gonna put a bedroom in the basement. So we run into quite a lot where the drain field's undersized.
We were talking about that the other day too, is that the county doesn't always let you add to drain fields.
It's not anymore, yeah. No, I'm sorry, they won't let you, okay, I said it wrong. So what we're running into is people will wanna add a bedroom, but now the county is requiring them to get a septic permit before they can get a permit to add on to the house or finish the basement. And, we're running into these houses all the time where the builder just put the minimum he did in for it. And it's causing problems for people wanting to put a bedroom in the basement.
Nate, I had that happen 20 years ago. I had a builder working for me. And the buyer wanted him to put a 3rd bedroom in the basement, another bathroom. And the county wouldn't let him do it until he added on to the drain field.
Right, yep.
Out of his pocket, because he didn't quote on the individual drain field.
And that was years ago,
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
20 years.
yeah.
Quick question. So when someone adds on to their house, and then they kind of overrun that drain field. I've seen it where they've just had to add another tank, and not necessarily the drain field. Was that just kind of a Band-Aid on the problem, or would you have to do a tank and a drain field all the time?
Typically, the tank is sized with the drain field for the bedrooms of the house. So if you're adding a tank, it's more likely than not that the drain field is gonna be substandard also size-wise. And it would probably have to be added onto it. But like you said, the county's, for some reason, this last 6 months, the county's been letting us repair drain fields. They've been letting us do a few more things that, I don't know, they haven't in time past.
Okay. In particular, so I was thinking they finished off above the garage and added like 3 bedrooms, but the fix was that they were required to put another tank in, but
Right.
they didn't do anything with the drain field. They just added another tank.
Okay.
So
What
I
county
wasn't
was
sure.
that? Was it Kent County?
No, it was in Kalamazoo.
Okay, all right.
So
So other counties, I'm not sure down there, but they do let that go on. Ottawa County will let that happen.
okay,
I think Kent County's a little more difficult with that.
okay.
If there is a house that has a tank there and is now converted to city water and sewer, the tank stay there or it needs to be removed? Like they said, I have people that is living there for ever and ever and they converted, do they need to remove that or that's totally fine, it just stays? They need to disclose that?
So if we're hooking up to city sewer,
Correct, if it's done and the tank is not ready in use, do they need to remove it or it
yep,
just
so
stays there?
we'll pump and crush it, hook up to city sewer. So the tanks stay there in the ground, but they're broken up to the point where they're not holding anything whatsoever.
Ah, okay.
And the same with the well, if the house is being hooked up to city water, the well needs to be properly capped.
Gotcha.
What does that mean, properly capped?
Have a well person come in and properly cap that well so that nothing can get down inside that well pipe and contaminate the water.
But, you know, Chuck, we used to, for years out in Jenison, we used to use the wells for watering the grass and just drink city water.
Yep, still can do it if you wish, but again, you may have to make absolutely sure there's absolutely no cross connection. Because we see people that still have the wells that still have, water going to outside faucets or going other places. And if it's gonna go to a sprinkling, it should go just directly to sprinkling.
Okay.
What happens with cross-contamination?
Cross-contamination, where you could get city water mixing with well water.
That's going into your house and you're drinking it, which is why you don't want to do it?
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to understand.
I've not had the opportunity to work with any properties that have the septic systems. So first time I run into that, obviously YouTube would be super easy to work with. I don't know a sanitarian, but are there terms or vernacular that I should be familiar with that's semi-exclusive to your industry?
I write very simple reports intentionally. It's true.
Mhm.
I write all my reports to an 8th grade education level. True story. And I've done that for the last 45 years. And all my reports, I make them very easy to read, very easily understandable. I try to leave nothing to guessing.
But is there anything that we should know if we're talking to like the sanitarian or, the vernacular, because sometimes in real estate, we've got some terminology that's a little bit different than
Right.
that outside world, so I just was curious if there's anything
Like
exclusive
what
to your
are
world.
nitrates, like what are nitrates and,
So when we talk about coliform bacteria and nitrates, basically we're talking about poop and fertilizer. So that's basically what the 2 tests that we do as a standard well test are the coliform bacteria and nitrates, just to make sure that there aren't those contaminants in the water.
what about lead?
Lead, not a bad idea. The thing with lead that you have to know is it can take as long as 10 days. So in your buy-sell agreement, if your buyer is asking for a lead test, you need some extra time. But lead's a good idea. It is in the soil. So is arsenic. We have arsenic in our soils, and especially in different areas of Kent County. In the Alto area near where I live, they found several areas with arsenic in the water. So coliform bacteria, nitrates, lead, and arsenic are all good tests to have done.
And you said in Alto they found arsenic. What about where are they finding the lead in the water?
There isn't a specific area, so.
It's just kind of scattered.
Yep, just depends on the strata that's in that area.
So with the bacteria that's in there breaking stuff down, is there ever an issue caused by like the gas that they release? Or is that just not a concern, or?
That is an issue and does rot tanks out also, typically not to the degree like a water softener would, but yes, we'll have a gasification process that happens over the outlet baffles of each tank, right?
How long do tanks last?
20 years on average.
The older the tank, the longer they're gonna last. When they use concrete, mix it up themselves. I've crushed tanks that are 60, 80 years old and they cannot break them up with an excavator. They were just built to stay. Nowadays, we are putting cheaper products in the ground. Concrete is getting worse and worse.
Sure.
So
It's like the difference between foundations built in the 1950s and foundations built today. I know houses built in the 50s that there isn't a single crack in the basement walls, whereas the average house today has at least one crack per wall. So part of it is because the builders jump on them so much faster today than what they used to 60 years ago. A lot of it's the concrete.
So then you have to replace the tank every 30, 40 years on a house?
if the tank is properly maintained, it should last longer. But now we're running salt water and everything else through it, and the soaps that we're using and everything that we have nowadays just seems to be breaking them down faster, accompanied with a poor construction of concrete. I only use Bush concrete tanks out of Muskegon because I trust them. Grand Valley is a huge supplier of tanks. I don't typically use their tanks because I replace a lot of their tanks. Bush concrete, I usually don't replace Bush concrete tanks. They use a fiberglass woven mesh in them, and it just seems to really hold up a lot better. In fact, I don't know that I've replaced a Bush tank in the past 4 years of replacing
And
tanks.
which one do you replace a lot?
I typically, Grand Valley put out a really bad batch of tanks in the late 90s to mid 2000s, and most of them are replaced by now. So they kind of give me a bad taste because I'm replacing Grand Valley tanks with Grand Valley tanks. Doesn't make sense to me. So, but there's no way of knowing other than just the lid being square or round.
So do I understand what you're saying is that there are levels of concrete, like some are, like it could be bad concrete or good concrete?
Concrete's just like a batch, basically.
Okay.
It's only gonna be as good as the person mixing it.
Okay,
I've just had really good luck or fortune with Bush tanks. They're a little more expensive, $20, $30, maybe $40 more per tank. But they just really seem to have a good concrete.
And are they the square or the round lid?
Bush is gonna be a round lid, which is also a lot easier to work with, makes more sense. When you have a round lid, you know you're gonna get it open versus a square lid, you might not get it open.
Right.
So,
How far does the well and the septic have to be from each other?
50 feet minimum in Michigan.
a commercial, it's 75, is it?
Yeah.
75 on commercial.
So then if you have a round lid, it's Bush?
Typically, Bush is renowned for using round lids. Yeah.
I have two questions. One, the over-the-counter Rid-X. Does that stuff really work and is it helpful? And is it recommended?
That is probably the question I get asked the most in my industry. And I tell everybody it works really good in a clinical study. Just like everybody's trying to make money. If I could market something that saved your septic system, made your septic system better, I'd probably do it too. I pump septics where the homeowner will swear by Rid-X, and it looks no different than everybody else's septic system.
Okay, would it cause harm if people do use it?
No.
Okay.
I've been told this, that if you're wanting to start a bacteria base in your septic system, to use chicken fat trimmings or chicken. Because if you leave chicken out on the counter, it's just a matter of how long before it goes rancid. So I've always heard that, and I've always told that to customers, every time you trim chicken, flush it down the toilet. And that typically is a good bacteria base. We also have something, it's called an AquaWorks system by Infiltrator, which Infiltrator makes the tanks that we're putting in. And it's an aeration unit that goes in the septic tank, and it has a bacteria bag that has to be replaced every year, and it sits down in the center of this unit, It's basically a spawning ground for healthy bacteria in the tank. So I have about 5 or 7 systems that I monitor through the counties. And I put one in 5 years ago into this septic system, and you can see down in the tank to the center line of the tank 5 years later, and they've never pumped.
Wow.
What is it called?
It's called an let's see, AquaWorks makes it, White Knight also makes it. Sledgehammer buys that from AquaWorks and paints it a different color and markets it and charges more. Same product as an AquaWorks, it's called AQUAWRX, I think.
Cost?
Cost to put these systems in are typically, the unit cost me about $1,500 just to buy. And it usually is, depending on how hard it is, because we have to run wiring to them, usually $1,500 to $2,000 to put them in. So it's a $3,500 to $4,000 Band-Aid, temporary Band-Aid, but I've seen them walk years and work just fine. And I've got 5 or 7 of them that I watch, and they're incredible. County does not like them because what people are doing, putting them in a tank in a system that's failing, and then getting the system rejuvenated, because it does, it'll rejuvenate a drain field, and then selling. The county wants to know what systems have it, so now we're required to pull a permit every time we put one in. And the county has to approve us to do it. So, yeah.
One question is, so on the septic, like, filter or no filter? Like, I've heard mixed reviews where the filter definitely has to be serviced every year. If not, you're gonna have a problem.
Yes.
If no filter, but you pump regularly, like every few years, you're never gonna have a problem. Like, what's your take on that?
I put a filter on every system I work on. I want my children in 10, 15, 20 years to know, oh, Dad put this system in. Me and my brother Joe, we put them in on everything. Most people don't put them in, right? So it's
What does that even mean, put a filter on?
Yeah, where?
So if you'll have so let's just say you've got a normal house with a series of 2 tanks. Your first tank is gonna have a conventional baffle in it that has no filter in it. Your second tank, going either to the pump chamber or to a drain field, will have, we use a Tough Tight EF6, it's called, 6-inch baffle filter. So it mimics the baffle, but it has this cartridge that slides out of the top of it and filters all the water going into the drain field. To your question, they only last a pumping typically. It's not something you replace, you wash out.
Right.
So it's not like a filter in your car where you gotta replace it.
When you say you wash it out or you replace it, the pumper would do that?
Correct, yep.
They would just automatically do it and you'd get a bill?
So
It's to keep solids from getting into your drain field.
I put risers on and filters on every system that I put in unless the customer says they do not want it. It's not a requirement, it's just something I do. Like I said, my children, I want them to know that Dad put that system in 20, 30 years ago. So in order to have a filter, you want to have a riser above that filter, which is something to access it so you don't have to dig to it. So if there is an issue with a filter clogging, say somebody uses a lot of grease or flushes a lot of grease down the toilet or the drain, it'll typically clog that filter up faster. So I want them to have an option. If I get a call, then I want to be able to go out there and I don't have to dig to it. I want to just unscrew a lid, pull the filter out, clean it, and let the water run out.
So you see risers and no filters at times?
Correct, yes.
Because one of the main reasons I asked, I just had mine done on Kalamazoo or Vandenburg County, and there wasn't a filter. So it's 2 tanks. There was a riser but no filter, and the guy pumping it. That's where I got kind of like my mixed reviews of like, yeah, it's good because if you don't service it, you're gonna have a problem. I mean, it can be clean, but so that's why I was just wondering why they chose not to do the filter. My specific.
Yeah, if you're gonna put a riser on it, you may as well put a filter on it. Filters, they cost me $50. Full disclosure, it's not a real major expense.
Okay.
So, we're required to put risers on 21 inches and beyond on any tank regardless. I put them on if they're a foot deep, 8 inches deep, then I'll throw a filter in there. The risers are a little more expensive because we have to buy, the lids are $80 a piece and the pipe is $30 a foot, so.
You're gonna see that on every one of our reports where those tanks are below 20 inches. Because you also get charged more for us to dig them.
Does it say whether they have a filter on it?
I'm sorry?
Would the report say, like, if you had your tanks pumped, would it say, do they tell you if you got a filter on it or not?
Typically they do.
Because my drain field's been there for over 20 years, we have never had a problem with it. I finally got them pumped out about 2 years ago.
Okay.
That's perfect.
If you have a happy bacteria base and you're not killing stuff off, a drain field will last for a very long time. I put them in planning on them lasting 40 to 60 years.
Yeah, I try not to dump water, like, from my fish tank and stuff, I dump it out my garden, yeah. Because I always think, oh, I should probably dump this outside, so, in the toilet.
Right.
So how often are you supposed to pump a septic, and how do you even know you're supposed to pump a septic?
We say every 3 years.
I think I speak for Chuck, but we're very grateful to be here. Very nice.
Thank you so much. We
We
appreciate your time.
appreciate it.
We love doing these. I've always, it's always been my thing all through the years to, as much education as I can help with, I'm gonna do it, so.
Well, we know this takes away from your time out in the field doing your business, so we truly do appreciate your time and especially your expertise.
Thanks. Like we were saying outside a couple minutes ago, I have a 24-hour hotline for you guys. If you have any questions at all, get on the phone. My phone's on my nightstand, I literally do answer it around the clock.
You realize you're talking to realtors, right?
I understand. Well, realtors, I understand, they work 7 days a week.
Yeah.
As a home inspector for the last 45 years, I work 7 days a week. In fact, I had a lot of years that I did more business on Saturday and Sunday because none of the other inspectors would do it.
Yeah.
So I sent my kids to college on just my weekend work.
That's great.
Nice.
I said I always took Sunday afternoon and Monday off. I said my kids growing up, we skied every weekend during the winter. They never stood in a lift line because we skied on Monday.
There you go.
Worked out. So we're gonna get into some fun stuff here. We're gonna talk about failures. Nathan, you want to go with your drawings just real quick?
Sure, yeah. So
Then let's get into some failures.
these are your typical drain fields you're gonna see. I didn't put anything conventional on here because conventional is what you see the most and it's the simplest. That's just a drain field in sand and so on. So what we'll have, let's just say this is a new build or a replacement. If we have a clay site and we have sand, it could be even 25, 30 feet down. We can dig a drain field in the ground and we can put, this is called a T-trench system. They're very expensive, not much more than that, but they're not cheap. What we'll do is we'll dig this clay out, and this is gonna be your sand level down here. We'll dig down there, so the water coming into your stone, this is all aggregate or all stone here. It comes in here, it goes down this trough, and goes down into the sand down below. These systems are not good. They're high failure rate, they're very expensive, but if you have a site that you don't have any other options for, this is your best option. It's either that or you could do a raised mount system. This is, if I was having a house, I'd probably rather this because you don't have a pump, you don't have a third tank. The one way you get these systems to last the longest is by pumping them very regularly. From the top, and you probably know this more than anybody, you can't tell if it's a T-trench or a regular conventional system because from the top they're the exact same.
Right.
You look down at the drain field, you don't know if this sand is down. This could be 20 feet in the ground. All right. This sand 2&S is what's commonly used in DOT, Department of Transportation, for building roads. Very expensive. It's required for all sand fill applications underneath a drain bed. This is your traditional raised mound septic system. These will typically be a gravity system with no pump, like I was saying before. These are always going to be a pump system. And very seldom do we see, unless the tanks are way up high and we can get gravity down to these pipes, typically we won't see these be what we would call a gravity mound. This is just called a pressurized raised mound. And that's the difference, just the terminology of it. One has pressure, one's gravity. This is all, right here is all in Kent County standards as of a year ago has changed to mostly 2&S sand, which is again that expensive DOT certified sand. This is regular what we call bank run sand here. Now think of this also as going the other way as well, not just right here. This is all the way around the drain field has these banks of sand around them. What we typically find out in a failure with these is the sand will come, no, I'm sorry, the effluent will come down here, hit this clay layer right here, and blow out the side of the drain field, shoot out water right here. Those are typically what we see if they're not installed properly, or just too much water usage. I mean, you see them blow out on the sides. That's the problem with those. One thing we just ran into a couple weeks ago was a system. This is your tank, and these are dry wells. This is all going to be aggregate. Aggregate is stone. So you're going to have just probably 20, 30 yards of stone around the drain field, I'm sorry, around these tanks. These tanks are going to have holes in them to leach the stone into the aggregate. Here's a top view kind of. Typically they take a big circle, they set a tank in the middle that has holes in the side of it, and then backfill it with stone. That's another way of getting rid of water.
Now people can do that by themselves, right? Especially indoor.
They do this on a very small scale, and it's like job security for me. So they put blue barrels in the ground, you know, dig a little trench, put a blue barrel in the ground, and try to get another year or 2 years out of the drain field. I typically see that up north.
No
I
permit.
don't typically see that in Cascade or Ada. But this would be a regular septic tank, looks just like a septic tank. So when a pumper comes to pump this tank, and you'll typically have 2 tanks in series here, and they don't have dry wells, I'm sorry, when we come to pump it, it'll appear that you have 4 tanks. These tanks typically are not, they don't have risers that come up to grade on them. They're usually buried and forgot. These systems are dangerous for home sales, because you just cannot really inspect them that well without exposing this whole lid. Sometimes they put the lids in the center of the tank because they're not actually a septic tank. They'll put the lid, if we don't know that, we could be digging 2 feet, we'd be digging this whole tank up just to try to figure out what it is. These are very uncommon, but like I said, 2 weeks ago we ran into one.
in a newer house.
What are those 2 additional tanks for then? You said they're dry tanks, what are they?
So the effluent comes in from the house, comes into this tank, goes out the baffle, comes into this tank, goes out this baffle, and then by the time it gets out here, it should be treated effluent. They run into here, and these tanks are full of holes on the side. And they're surrounded by stone. And the water runs up to the first level of holes, goes into the dirt, or into the stone, and into the dirt, and transfers out. They fail from the bottom up. A lot of times they'll be open-ended. They will just be buried with stone down below, so the water just lands in there, and they just start failing from the bottom to the top. The only way to really check these, if you're lucky enough and the guy did a good job, he put enough stone around the tank to be able to inspect it to see if there's odor, sludge, or anything of that sort in there. You gotta get your poking rod right on the side of the tank, go down, find stone, and then hopefully get an auger in there if you can, and try to see if you can find out where that sludge layer is at. Again, these are pretty uncommon. They don't actually allow them really in Kent County. I don't think they allow them really anywhere. I've never put one in, just because I don't think they're a good system.
How do you even find it if it's buried? Is it the core testing? You just, oops, we hit a tank? Is that how you know?
Yep, so we have a tool that's called a poking rod. It's just a T like that, and it's got a point on it. And we just go down and bang around until we find it. Yeah. Chuck
Just
knows
all
about
over the
those.
yard, or there's a certain way you start, you're looking for those lids, or?
I look for imperfections in the lawn. Typically around a septic system, it'll all have been dug up at one point. There'll be a little bit of settling that takes place. If somebody's a good pumper, or somebody who has pumped, there will typically be an indentation over the tanks where the lid is.
Sometimes you can actually see it from Earth View, from Google.
That's right, that's a bad thing, can be. The tanks usually never have snow on top of them if they're less than 18 inches deep, because the bacteria living in there, eating, is creating heat.
And we had one last winter where there literally was there was a vacant house, been vacant for a couple of years. The tank was almost, it was almost at working level. But there was absolutely no bacterial action going on. Tank froze, blew it out the sides. So, a different, I've only seen that happen once in thousands of inspections, but it does happen. So All right, let's talk about failures for a couple of minutes. I don't know exactly how much time we have left today,
We
but
have as much time, we have all afternoon, if that's how long it takes for you to teach us everything we need to know about this.
all right. You want to cover cracks a second, and then I'll cover drain fields?
Sure, yeah. So as I was talking to you, James, right? Bush tanks, here's your tank. This is looking down from the top. Has a round lid here and a round lid here. A traditional tank from, say, Valley Farms, or I'd say 90% of tank manufacturers have a square lid here and here. When a crack does happen, or heaving or settling or something, the crack will typically hit this lid and go around it, and it won't affect the tank. If you have sharp points, the cracks typically go like this, we'll see. Your tank is is a lot more susceptible to falling in. That's why square versus round is a lot better. I've never seen one actually crack with a round lid, but with square tanks, we replace them all the time. And I don't know why there's not a code that says we have to have round lids, but they just typically don't fail like that. So, you've got water coming into the tank. If it's coming from another tank or directly from the house, it doesn't matter. But we typically see the water, as it goes through the tank, gasify right here at the outlet section, and typically rots the outside of the tank, the inside of the tank, and then creating the tank concrete to just weaken, and it's cracks at those lids. That's very common. That's probably my biggest job description, is replacing septic tanks.
And the cost of that, like if that were to happen on a property anywhere in Kent County, the cost to replace that?
So I would plan on 7 to 8, but 3 weeks ago we did one for 12. So
7 to 12,000
yeah, I would say,
to replace the septic
Yep.
only.
Right. Typically what we're putting in now is polyethylene tanks. So we don't use concrete that often anymore. I use concrete tanks in clay applications because clay and plastic don't mix real well. So if it's sand, I'll put a polyethylene tank in, and then indefinitely that tank will be fine if it's installed right. They're a little more expensive, but I typically eat the cost on the difference because they're way easier for me to put in. I don't have to wait for a concrete truck to show up and deliver the tank and set it in the hole. I can literally bring them there in my pickup truck, and I can set them in with my wife, and it's done.
I've seen them do it.
That's impressive. It's majestic.
It takes the most time screwing them together.
Right, yes. So when you have tanks in series, you got your two tanks, the most common area of failure is on the second tank right here. The second most common area of failure is on the first tank right here. I never see a tank fail here or here. It's always on the outlet side, and that's because the baffle is letting air come back and transfer, and then it gasifies there somehow. I think it's called microbial induced deterioration. So that is the two most common places we see tank fail. So I'd say 80% of the job, 80% of the time I'll get to a job because this tank B is broken here, and the pumper says tank, I'm working on this one right now with you, the tank is fine. Chuck looks at it and says it's good. Well, the pipe going here, typically I see some major problems on this tank right here. Pass inspection on pumping, but when the health department comes out and inspects this tank, they're gonna have to see this section of the tank here, of the first tank. 80 to 90% of the time I replace both tanks. So just because the first tank is fine, then it's typically, you start digging around it, you find other problems.
Gotcha.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, let's talk about drain field failures in a minute. How many of you guys have seen my reports? Okay. Everything we do is photographed. We photograph the tanks, we photograph the baffles, we photograph drain field stone, so on and so forth. So well systems, the wellhead's photographed, everything, all the controls, the tanks, the basement, both in my home inspections and in my well and septic inspections, everything is photographed. Average home inspection has 50 to 60 photographs, average well and septic, probably close to 20.
Is that kind of standard practice in your industry, or is that just what you do?
That's what we do. Those of us that use home gauge software, that's typical. Don't know what. I'll be honest with you, I kind of operate on a kind of a different planet from the other inspectors. I have no idea what they do. I said, this is my 45th year, and to be honest with you, I don't care what they do.
That's probably why Susan recommended that we have you here
There you
teaching
go.
today.
And kind of an independent sort. But in any case, so when we're doing a drain field, we'll go out, take the probe, we'll probe the drain field, figure out, the size of it, how big it is, and then I usually bore the header. The header is where the effluent goes, as it leaves the tank. As I do pull the stone out of the ground, I usually put it on a white towel, so that everybody can see the color of the stone and of the soils that are around it. The other thing, if you're on site with me, you'll see me do, and I wear gloves, is I'll grab that stone, I'll pull it up to my nose, and see what kind of odor we have. If there's no odor or just a soil type odor, I'm not going to worry too much. If it's a lot of gray mass as it comes up with the stone, I don't bother lifting it because I know it's bad. Gray or black matter around the stone is not good, says a failure. So if I do find that, I usually run a second probe down just to see how far into the field it goes. And we've had one in Lowell that we did that with, and the problem had gone far into the drain field, so they needed to be replaced. In fact, this one had 2 drain fields in it, and both of those had failed. So if you see one of our reports, we say that we've got a drain field failure, you'll see pictures typically of either gray mass or black mass within the stone.
How does that, I see how like a septic could fail because it's a concrete. The drain field is dirt, sand, gravel. How does that fail?
Biomass.
Okay.
So as these impurities, as the solids that have gotten out of the tanks come down, they get to the bottom of the drain field and they form a floor, basically. Water can't penetrate anymore. Then it goes sideways. It goes elsewhere.
What causes that?
Just basically impurities getting into the drain field for the most part. Not adequate pumping. I've had some drain fields fail. No, I haven't pumped it in 20 years. Well, yeah, I know why your drain field failed.
And that from the failure causes flooding, correct?
Yeah, a lot of times it causes water to come to the surface, effluent type water to come to the surface. So if you're on a site, you see kind of a water with a sheen on top of it, take a sniff.
Water's really smart. It finds the path of least resistance, no matter where that is.
Yeah.
It's an amazing thing. Okay?
You ever seen a puddle in your driveway? If you have gravel driveway, it can be 100 degrees out, and you just have a puddle that stays there for 5-6 days. It's because all the silt from your driveway has found the lowest point. And that silt is holding the water up, what we call a limiting layer. So it's like visqueen, and eventually the water does go through it. And a lot of times it'll dry and it'll peel up. You ever seen that? That's that limiting layer that would have been in your drain field with different products, but it literally dries and it'll peel up. And then you can see that's what was holding the water in that puddle. Just for an example.
What example?
You could hold a garden hose on Lake Michigan shore for a millennium and it would just sit there and just run as long as it's clean water.
Okay, one last note about septic tanks in a minute. We're going to cover wells quickly, and then we'll go back to questions. That you want to give them your rule on what goes into septic tanks?
Yes, anything except feminine products are a big one. Baby wipes are another huge one. If I get to a job and they've been religiously using baby wipes for the past decade, I probably won't be able to pump it, and I'll probably have to walk away from it because I cannot get them in my hose up into my truck. It just doesn't work.
He'll send them to a competitor he doesn't like.
So what was the question you asked? So I'm on track.
Garbage disposal.
Okay. Garbage disposals are not horrible, but they're not great. They put a lot of unprocessed matter down the septic system. It has to go into the tank, and the tank does all the work. Our bodies naturally do the work when we eat. Our bodies are what are producing bacteria, and they're doing all the work. You put a raw onion down your septic system, that tank has to now work on that onion before it can send it out as relatively clean water. So garbage disposals cause you to pump a lot more often. So a cover filter products, baby wipes, typical toilet paper breaks down as designed to go into septic systems. Usually we don't see a problem with that.
Costco has a pretty good breakdown toilet paper.
Yes, yes.
Costco brand?
Thinner toilet papers are gonna be obviously way better than a thicker toilet paper. So, all these ads you see on TV, they don't help septic systems. They help me, they don't help septic
What
systems.
about they're like a baby wipe, but they're not
Flushable wipes.
but they're called flushable wipes.
They use them a lot, but I've never seen any problems with them. I know they're out there and I don't know how they break down, but apparently they do. I haven't seen any problems with them.
Okay,
Because I wouldn't know if it's a regular baby wipe or a flushable wipe.
right.
But typically baby wipes, when they come in your tank, they lay down on top, they float and they lay on top of each other. And then when I go to put a hose on it, they lock right up. They don't like to move down a pipe very well.
The garbage disposals with like the enzymes, is that a benefit or not?
I've never heard of it.
Well, there's like garbage disposal, and then you can buy like a cartridge in there, so it like puts enzymes in there.
Oh, okay, all right. That would be combating exactly what we're trying to fight against, right?
So if you had a septic and you were replacing a garbage disposal, that'd be a bonus, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
I wasn't sure if it was just like
My guess
a
is it-
marketing thing or
Yeah,
if they
well,
really
it
work.
would be kind of like the filter on your fridge. Who's changed the filter on their fridge, you know? I guess every once in a while you do, but you don't think about it, and you probably don't know if it's empty.
So I'm gonna try to convince my wife to get the RV toilet paper.
Not gonna happen.
Yeah, it's a catch-22.
Not gonna happen.
One way to combat it is just to pump more, you know, because you're pumping all of that out of your tank. And grease. Grease is probably the number one bad deal.
No bacon grease down the disposal.
Right, right. It just gets in and it floats on top and it clogs. That's why we put filters on to catch it.
They have these high-powered disposals that have more blades in them and stuff like that. I would assume that would make a difference for a septic tank.
Slightly, possibly, but it's the unprocessed food that you're putting down in your tank that you're
That's
still
the real
putting the
problem.
same amount of unprocessed food down.
Okay, let's talk about wells for a minute. Dude, the big things that we look for is I'm looking for recovery time. I'm looking for how many gallons per minute I'm getting, and I'm looking for recovery time on that well. So typically I'm gonna run 2 or 3 faucets. I'm gonna gauge how many gallons per minute I'm getting, and then I'm gonna go down and I'm going to watch the well and the well gauge, and I'm gonna see how long from the time the well turns on until it goes up and turns off. That's basically what I'm looking for. Is I know that the faucets that I have on are producing about 7 gallons per minute. If that well can keep up with that and build, I know it's probably building at about 9 gallons per minute. We've had a lot of them lately that have been in the 5-6 gallon range. I had one of them, it was a newer well, and it just, with the faucets on, just kept going down. I had to get a well man out and had to figure out why. As it turned out, it was a dirty screen at the bottom of the well that was blocking the water from getting up. So mostly with wells, that's what we're looking for. I'm looking for gallons per minute. And that's about it. Obviously, as I said, we're doing california bacteria nitrates test. Occasionally, we are doing lead, we are doing arsenic, but not all that often, but again, we need extra time. So I know that's really quick, and I mean, we could talk about wells and well construction, but I don't think you guys really need to get into that, to be honest.
Are there any places in Kent County where it's hard to get a well because you can't hit water?
Yep. And I've used witching sticks several times in order to find the well. Corner of 76th Street in Whitneyville, we all had to use witchers in order to find our wells. We're down over 200 feet, and we witched a well that was 200 feet deep.
Oh my gosh.
Since Tim doesn't know what a witcher stick is, can you enlighten us?
I know what it is.
So,
Yeah, what, explain, because a lot of us have never dealt with any of this, so what is a witcher stick?
That's voodoo.
I know what it is, but Dan doesn't.
I don't either. And
I've never
so
used
you're-
one. Full disclosure.
You have to have magic hands for that.
And I'm
That's right.
surprised to hear you say it, because I always thought that was just kind of a, what do you call it?
Wives'
Urban
tale?
legend.
nope, it works. I mean, you have to have the right amount of electromagnetic forces moving through your body. But those are, 2 witching sticks. Usually take a coat hanger, piece of wire. I've seen people use willow sticks. But I use, 2 pieces of a coat hanger, hang on just very loosely and walk around the piece of property. When I get over the top of the well, these 2 come together, back up, they come apart.
That's cool.
That's about
What is the science behind that?
What's that?
What is the science behind that?
Don't know.
It works.
So is that
Well, it may
witch-
work for somebody, it may not work for some other people, correct?
That's correct. Like I said, you have to have the right electromagnetic flow working through your body in order for it to work. With willow sticks, the willow's going to seek the water. So if you get some small willow branches, walk around with those. They will seek the water.
Sit down.
Interesting.
Isn't that fantastic? That's how they used to find where to put the well.
Sure, still works.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah, we've had it where they've missed my next door neighbor. The well driller just stuck a hole in the ground and found nothing. We witched the well. We only moved him 5 feet, and he hit an aquifer.
You know what?
It works.
No, he hit
An
a
aquifer.
Hit an aquifer. Hit water. So, like I said, in our reports, you're going to see gallons per minute. You're going to see distance from the septic tanks. You're going to see distance from the drain fields in the reports. That's most of it for wells.
I got a question with the bladder sizes. So I'm in, some small houses that have this huge bladder tank, and then I'm in large houses, and I might see a small one kind of sitting on the wall. Like, I don't really understand the size of the bladder tanks.
Yeah, the newer systems are a demand system.
Okay.
You'll also see a control panel on the wall with that small tank.
Yep.
Yeah, that's basically a demand system.
Okay.
So as soon as you turn a faucet on, the well kicks on and starts up.
Okay.
Now, with the old systems, with the larger tanks, wells turning on and off is what kills wells typically. But they've designed these new wells with these newer systems where the on and off doesn't kill the well pumps.
Okay.
So whereas the old systems, they use a larger tank, so when the well kicks on, it stays on. It'll shut down at say 40 pounds and doesn't turn off until 60 or 65 pounds. Well, it gives that pump time to run, get up to there, and then the pump can rest while it goes back down to 40. So it doesn't burn the pump out as easily. If you're in a house, water's running and you hear the pump go on and off, on and off, on and off, that's a bad tank.
That's a what?
Bad tank,
Okay.
bad bladder.
Okay.
I'm gonna ask a very dumb question, but I've gotta know. So when you find where the water is for the well, you winch it or witch it or whatever it is, do you then have to enclose that water?
No, you drill the well.
You just drill something that goes down and pulls the water out of the ground, it's not enclosed water?
Correct.
Okay, I didn't know that, so that's what I wanted.
Usually there's a big screen, and a good well will have a big stainless steel screen on the end of the 5-inch casing that goes into the water.
Yeah.
Down below. They have to go through a limiting layer, right?
Right.
When they're drilling a well.
Gotta go through a layer of clay.
And that, you can have water 20 feet down if you have clay, it'd be beautiful water. But if you've got all sand down, you've got to get to a layer of clay and go through that. And that's all keeps all the imperfections and impurities out from the groundwater above.
Right.
So I think that something that I didn't realize when I was in my career a long time is about how water is underground. Because we just look at the lakes, we just see surface water. Could you kind of explain what's under the surface and why you'll move 5 feet and all of a sudden you hit water and there wasn't water next door, or 5 feet over?
That's just, it's the strata, layers going through. Since we were glaciated, the glaciers brought down layers and layers and layers and layers of clay and sand, basically, along with the topsoil. It's just a matter of how those layers were laid down 13,000 years ago.
So I was trying to get at, we have rivers underground, don't we?
Correct, aquifers.
And that I didn't realize that there were rivers under the ground. So when we're putting in a well, we have to go past the clay to get to a clean river underground. Because we're basically putting a well into a lake or a river, correct?
We are floating, right? Currently floating.
Yeah, into a reservoir underground.
There is cross contamination between the well and the septic. Could it be? Have you seen? Could it happen?
I've seen it happen when they're too close together.
Okay. That was, it makes sense that he put them on opposite sides sometimes.
Well, what Nathan will tell you is as the effluent comes down through the sand of the mound system or through the sand underneath the drain field, it doesn't take long for that water to get purified.
Right, you can drink it, I've heard, after 10 inches of sand. It's purified. I've heard that.
Neither one of us have tried it.
Don't say, Nathaniel said you could.
I'd probably mix it with a little Canadian club just to kill any.
In Africa, my family goes over to Sudan quite a bit, and you have these carbon filters. You could take nasty Nile River water or wherever you want, dump it in this carbon filter, and it's drinkable. It's safe. So it doesn't take much to clean water. And 10
You
inches
just
of
have to have
sand.
courage to drink it.
Yes, correct, yeah. 10 inches of sand, they say, is enough to purify even sewage.
So if you're drawing water from a river underground, if you live in a neighborhood, there could be, is it a finite amount of water? Like one neighbor could use more water and then cause it to go dry?
Possibly it could be in the same aquifer, but every time it rains, snow melt, so on and so forth, those aquifers are refreshed.
So it's not necessarily connected to your neighbors,
Not necessarily.
but it could be.
It's possible.
Okay.
I heard in Byron Center, there's only one aquifer out there. If it gets contaminated, they've got a big problem with water out there. Is that correct?
I've heard things like that in different areas. I wouldn't be surprised, yeah. And that's why we pull permits for wells. We get them tested, and we don't let, typically, the health department doesn't just let you have a stab well stuck in the ground with a pitcher pump on it anymore. And you can also not have a hydrant in your yard that does not run through your house with a check valve on it. Because when you shut your hydrant off, the water, the frost-free valve, you know what those are?
Sucks it back in.
Yeah, so it'll take potentially the fertilizer from your grass or chicken droppings or whatever it is, it'll let it go back in. I say that because they're mostly on farms. It'll let it go back into the water.
Yeah, that's why there's a backflow preventer on all your sprinkler systems. So if you look at your sprinkler system, on the south side of your house, there's a little bell-shaped
Big brass thing with valves on it.
right, and that keeps the water from the hose to get back in and contaminate your system. Yes.
Do you guys know, or can you explain what happened in Rockford with Wolverine? Did that get into the aquifers, or is it just in the river, or?
Yeah, it's a plume. It just worked its way out through all of the rivers of water underground. Best way to describe it.
What is a sanitarian and how does it differ from what both of you?
He deals with sanitarians, I don't.
I know them all, have all their phone numbers, personal, great relationship with all of them. You shouldn't deal with them unless you have a problem. So the permitting process would be where you get introduced to the sanitarian for your township. Kent County, I don't know how many townships we have, is it 9, 10, 12?
Sure.
But each township has a designated sanitarian. That sanitarian could have 2, 3 townships. I think we have about 5 of them in Kent County. So if you're talking to a sanitarian, it's because you're either pulling a permit you have a problem with a septic system or a well.
What do they do? What,
They're a representative of the county.
okay.
Townships, this is a huge misconception in septics. Everybody's like, well, what's my township gonna say? Township has nothing to do, unless you live in Brooks Township in Nuevo County, they have nothing to do with the septic system. They have no bearing over it whatsoever. There's no permitting through the township, there's nothing whatsoever.
Understand, Brooks just eased the inspection requirement.
Okay, all right, that's Hess Lake, right?
Yeah.
So the reason Brooks is involved on a township level is because the county, in Nuevo County, has 2 sanitariums for the whole county. And Brooks Township has major problems with Hess Lake having algae blooms, right?
Right, it's so
And-
shallow.
So shallow.
It's a
They're having-
dying lake, I heard.
They have major contamination from
Yeah.
all the very poor septic systems, because when they built those houses, they were just bam, 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 bam. I've seen cars as septic tanks. So, it's intense up there. So, we'll typically find what's that?
You're in Nuevo County, what would you
Right,
expect?
true. True. So you'll typically find lots of problems with this, so I think the township, I don't know this, but I think that's why the township kind of intervened on the behalf of the county. But township, nothing to do with septic systems.
So what does the sanitarian do? He represents the county
Correct?
and does what?
He comes out and he will determine what style system we're gonna put in. He's gonna come out and basically give me a recipe in the form of a permit. And I need to know from that permit what style system we're gonna go to. These systems right here, I have been able to, I have a little tool, Corvette, like you use. I went down, I wanna say 23 feet in the ground with a tiny tool to find sand down here with the county. Otherwise, on these systems, when you do a site evaluation, you have to have a massive machine there to find sand. They're gonna meet me on site or a contractor on site with a machine in order to get to this sand to try to figure out how deep it has to go and if the sand is permeable enough or wet, or so on. I've been able to have a little bit of luck with the county letting me drill down with this. It's a lot cheaper. It costs my arms, but it's a lot cheaper than bringing a 50,000 pound machine
Excavator
out
with
there.
that.
Otherwise, that is an isolated system. If the county cannot find sand in the top 5 feet, they're gonna put a mound in. And I can't always put a mound in on every site. So before we put one of these in, I get a machine regardless, and I dig down to see if we can find sand down deep, to see if we can put in one of these. The county just changed the requirements on these to do what's called a 50% cut down. And that would just make this trench wider because these are having such failure rates. Another system that is a very good system that I didn't even think about until I was just drawing that will be just a full cut down, it's called. So here's your stone right here. This is all 2&S down to the sand level.
What's 2&S?
2&S is an MDOT certified sand.
Oh, okay.
And it's, again, it's expensive. That's why these systems are 35, can be 40,000, typically in the high 20s, but this is called a full cut down. The only difference between this one and this one is we don't have this, like that. It just gives more permeable soils between there and there. This trench is really only 3 foot wide, but if you're in a subdivision, they make this go to a 50% cut down, which makes if this is 20 foot, this has to be 10 foot. So, because they're having such high failure rate. I never have put one in at actually 3 foot because it doesn't make sense to me, so I always go a little wider to begin with. So I don't know how I got on that. Oh yeah, sanitarians, that you were asking about sanitarians. So the sanitarian, when you pull the permit, it's $300 for a permit in Kent County. It's $325 just for a tank replacement permit in Allegan County. I think a full septic permit's more than that in Allegan County. Tank only permit in Kent County is $150. What the sanitarian is going to do if you pull a tank only permit, they're going to come out, they're going to look at where the tanks need to go and where they are. And they're going to measure the isolations from the well, and they're going to issue a permit based off of that. If you pull a $300 permit, which is a well and septic permit, even though we're not using the well portion of it, you pull a well and septic replacement permit, it's $300. They're going to come out, they're going to do soil borings down to 5 feet. They'll issue a permit based off of what they find in those soil borings. if they believe because of the houses around there and they have records, sand is down deeper, they'll want a machine to come out there and do a deeper test hole. Typically, we charge $500 to $700 to do test holes. And it's not really a moneymaker for us because we show up with a $100,000 machine to make $500 to $600. It's not really worth it, but it puts us in line to potentially do that drain field. So typically you'll find test holes will be a good deal for the consumer. The health department then goes back to their office. This process can take up to 30 days. They don't have to talk to you, they can do whatever they want for 30 days because they're the government. They will issue a permit within 30 days. I've usually been seeing permits come out about a week. Tank replacements are really quick. They'll issue a permit based on what they find on the site, and then you put that out to contractors to get quotes back. I get questions all the time. How much is this gonna cost? How much is it gonna cost? Without a permit, I don't know. I don't put my name out there as one that just throws numbers out there and says the system's gonna cost this much, because if I think there's sand out there, and I quote it for, I tell you verbally it's conventional system, and I'm putting this in, I don't look good. So I typically hold my numbers back until there's a permit. Tank replacements, I can usually guess, those are pretty cut and dry. I know what the sanitary is gonna say. So those I can usually quote just by looking at it.
So they're just basically the governing body over permits.
Correct. And if you do a bad job, they're your enemy. And I've never had one that's come close to failing or had an install problem ever. So they usually like coming out to our sites. So that's a good thing. They are also the standard to make sure that the customer does not get screwed over by a contractor doing a bad job. So they hold me to a certain standard also.
So the procedure for that is you get they come out, they give you the permit, and then you do the work,
And they inspect it.
and then they come back and inspect
Correct.
it.
Correct.
And that's kind of the same thing, Chuck, when they're pumping out the tanks, you're standing there to make sure they really did it right.
That's what I was gonna say next to, this portion I'm gonna do now is called Notes from the Field. These are the things that we're seeing out there. Again, when you're recommending septic pumpers to your buyers or sellers, you're recommending inspectors, number one, make sure that your inspector is going to look inside the tanks. We've had trouble with some of the pumping companies leaving 10 to 20% in the tanks, charging people for the full amount but not pumping everything out. Also, if your well and septic inspector is requiring a contract be signed by your buyer or seller, who's ever paying for the well and septic inspection, make sure they read that contract carefully. I can't say that forcefully enough. Make sure they read that contract carefully. There's only one that I know of that does it. So, caution.
What are they looking
That's
for when they read it?
why.
If you get it, read it. I'm not going to say any more than that.
I can tell you later.
So, quick question, maybe a gross one, but when they pump it out, what does like plumbers, whoever pumps it out, do with that waste then?
We take it to the wastewater treatment facility in Muskegon,
Okay.
and we discard it in a giant lake. Back up with our trucks and we just dump it off.
And then it gets cleaned, or?
They process it the way a drain field would be processed.
They used to spread it. Arnsman's did. Do they still do that?
Still do.
Yeah, they spread it on fields.
There's a couple of 100-acre
Uh-huh.
fields near me that
Oh.
they pump.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll see them out there.
That's awful in the summer.
All the ones around on my house are injected. All injected underground.
No?
Isn't that what Milorganite is?
No?
Milorganite? Isn't that human?
Are you talking about the process from the city?
Yeah.
So what they'll do is they'll run it through a giant compressor. They'll take all the sewage from the city and they'll run it through a giant thing and squeeze all the water out of it. And they'll have this very, very toxic, high dense amount of sewage, and they'll bring it up and they'll dump it on fields up north, yeah.
Isn't that like highly grossly smelling in the summer?
Yeah, don't get behind one of those trucks.
Once it rains though, it
Yeah.
just turns right into dirt.
But isn't that, I mean, I think that would be just nasty or dangerous, I mean, with the.
Yeah, there was a truck
bacteria,
that
I mean,
didn't blow up but lost the side valve up in Cedar Springs, and it was an ordeal because it's so much more toxic. I was pumping,
When your body eliminates it for a reason, it's
Right.
toxic.
so up on 22 Mile, I got a call one day from the government, and a truck carrying that had flipped over in the ditch and was dumping it, so we had a big contamination spill. We sat there with our pump trucks and just drew it out of the creek, and we're just pumping it. And
Wow.
the trailer just
Nice.
came off the truck, and it was
Oh,
coming
wow.
right from Grand Rapids, so, yeah, it's very toxic. It's way more toxic than your septic system would be, because it's
Because
condensed.
it's so concentrated, right?
Right.
So how do we know if it's, obviously, you're doing photos, you trust him, so we know if we contact either of you two, we can rest assured that our jobs are being done correctly. But if it's not you two, if you're not in it, how do we know if this is being done right?
You don't until there's a failure.
Right.
Pictures, getting the pictures would help.
You talking about an install or an inspection?
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our
I mean, what to
standard,
look for
Unless there was a failure, you wouldn't know.
So what do we look for when we have an install or an inspection? What should we be looking for? So pictures, lots of pictures that you're saying. What else should we look for? Or what would be red flags that, ooh, I need to have somebody else help me look at this to make sure? What are some red flags? Because we don't do this every day.
on my end, there's really nothing, I'm not gonna take pictures of my whole process and send them to customers and, you guys, I can't, I'm not opposed to it, but I just, when I'm working on, when I'm putting a drink filter, that's what I'm doing, you know?
Right.
Yeah, it really is, I mean, quite literally, the only way you're gonna find out is if there is a failure. If somebody hasn't done the job as far as doing the proper inspection, or they haven't done the proper pumping, you're not gonna know until
So
there's a
there's
failure.
no way to know that, so.
But you can go, if you go,
You have to trust your inspector, you have to trust your
Yeah.
pumper.
And you
I
have
like
to
to go to
control
them,
your
too, and see.
inspector.
I like to see
You
the
have to control
stones.
who's being chosen for your inspection.
Oh, yeah.
Ask them if they take pictures.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of it, you guys all remember Kathleen Hill?
Yeah.
Heard that name? Okay, I worked
Yep.
real closely with Kathleen Hill for years. Then Chuck came along, obviously Kathleen Hill passed away. Chuck came along and I'm working with him. I would not link myself with anybody that was questionable. I would be talking about him the way I just did about other people there a little bit ago. So I wouldn't be working with him. I've seen him work, and the fact that he wants to be there when we pump it. I mean, you trust me to pump a septic system with you not being there, but yeah, he still wants to have it done just so.
So he doesn't pay you to be here.
Well, I think that's the bottom line. If you're not getting, you have to vet your inspectors. If you're asking the seller to pay for it, you have no control if you're a buyer's agent. So you have to insist on pictures. You have to insist if it's on public sewer. You have to insist on a bill. And we've added that verbiage in your contracts, guys. If you've looked at your purchase agreement, the wording under septics and well has changed again because the situation that we ran into, Chuck and I ran into out in Byron Center. And the situation one of our agents ran into on it being said it was city sewer, and even the home inspector missed it. And we are going to be vetting these inspectors.
So that particular agent, what could they have done differently or is there anything they could have done differently to have avoided that?
Avoided which?
The one that Susan's talking about, where it said it was city, but it actually wasn't.
Check with the local water authority.
Or get a copy of the sewer water.
And see.
Right, but sometimes it's on sewer and not on water, and vice versa.
If it's
Sometimes they
if
got
it's on
city
sewer, there's
water
gonna be a
and
bill.
they still got a
So-
drain field, so.
Yeah, if there's
They can
sewer,
say-
if there's city sewer, city water, there's gonna be a bill.
The agent will get mixed up, oh yeah, that's got city whatever.
And
then it's
on
only one.
disclosures, I actually, on listings, I see that a lot.
I do too. That's
I
only
see
one
it
or
all.
the other. And then you're like, hey, wait a minute, where's the well? Then you go to show the house, there's no well.
Yeah, I do catch that quite a bit.
And then then
Happens.
you have to ask, or there is a well and it says that it's city water and then there's a well.
Right.
Yeah.
Since this PFAS thing, we're running into a lot more city water septic system than before.
Right.
The cities are, Wolverine Worldwide is paying for everybody to have water, but they're not paying for everybody to have a septic system. So just because it has a well, doesn't mean it has a septic system and vice versa.
Right.
See that more.
And do the bills read differently then, if they have both,
Yeah, they just.
There's gonna be separate
One will say
amounts.
sewage and one will say water.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, it does read slightly different. Chuck, we had this one house where the home inspector said it was city water. Now, I know fully well that he must have just looked at the listing card. But can you explain for my new people here, when you're looking at a house, what to look for if it's on septic? Because you should look to see how that system is working when you're showing a house if you get a right on it.
Now, if it's a standard construction, not a walkout, typically you're gonna have a pipe coming out right about eye level. At some point, typically either in the front or the back of the house. There'll be a 4-inch pipe, stick through the basement wall. It isn't always septic. A lot of times it may have been septic at one time, but then it's been hooked up to sewer. So you still have to run a public records check to see if sewer has been added. City water, well water is pretty easy. I mean, if you've got a tank and a pump, typically it's going to be a well, not always.
Yeah.
But you're going to have a water meter, usually in the front of the basement, if it's going to be city water.
So what's the eye level 4-inch pipe?
That's your outlet for your sewer, for your septic tank, I'm sorry. For your septic
Typically,
system.
sewer goes through the floor. So when they run the sewer out in the street, it's deep enough to catch everything in the basement. They don't.
Although not always.
I've seen it very seldom, but I've been allowed to even come out of the house at eye level, continue on, and then drop outside of the house real fast to get down to 8-9 feet.
Right. We do occasionally find sewer lines that far off the floor. If the lateral in the street is a little bit shallow. The basement floor is shallower than what the lateral is in the street.
And for the new agents, the lateral is what you run.
Lateral is the main sewer line for the street.
So there is no clean out on the septic tank?
There typically actually is a clean out on most of them.
Will they clean out inside the basement, in the basement? Okay.
How long it takes for you to, if you were to replace tanks, how many days it takes? Is it quick or is it like a week job or?
Tank replacements are no more than a day and a half max. Probably like that one I was telling you was 12,000. I think that took us 2 days. It was underneath the deck. That's why it was so expensive. But deck had to come off, go back down. So those situations, it's going to take us a little longer. Typically in and out 1 day, done.
Nathan has a very large excavator. It doesn't take him long to dig a hole.
But I also have a small one big enough to get in the backyard.
So, go ahead. If you don't know that there's gonna be a failure until it occurs, then I wonder is there liability for either the inspector or the person that installed it? Do they carry a insurance policy to cover those?
If Nate, you still do this here?
So my pump cards, 2 years for a pumping? Usually it's a year for a pump card. If that tank falls in and I said it was good in a year, I would do 2 years. If I say a tank's good, it's good, it's good.
Thanks.
Okay.
If there's a problem tank, I'll let you know. It'll be right on my pump card if there's a problem.
Us the same way. We have a 1-year guarantee. If we have no stipulations on our report, we guarantee them for a year. We guarantee the tanks and the septic field. We don't guarantee wells.
Okay.
But we have a septic guarantee for a year.
For an install, and this is where the county is good for me, when they give it their green seal of approval, or that green sticker, they don't do that, but if they were, electrical gets a green sticker, they assume all the liability for that septic system. So it actually is, I wash my hands of it as soon as they approve it, because they said it was done right. So it's a little bit of a layer of protection for me. I never worry about, the only thing that could go wrong maybe is during backfill, stuff gets hit, moved, or shifts. But we're careful, and we don't have any problems. I plan on having my kids do this someday, so the more wrong I do now, the more wrong they're gonna have to deal with.
It's probably gonna be changing.
Right, vaporize.
Gonna be able to do.
Right, yes.
So about the well water, I sometimes see the homeowner has that water filter and also the water softener. So what's the main difference between those? If the house use well water, is the water filter a must-have thing, or it's like both?
Are you talking about
Sure.
an RO system?
Yeah, with your RO system, it basically takes everything out of the water except for the H2 and the O. Everything else is gone. The softener systems are basically just to soften the water, just to soften the hardness.
Okay.
So totally two different
Right.
systems.
Better taste, softer shower.
Yeah.
The RO system.
With the RO system, the big problem is it takes everything out. So I actually have an RO system that has a mineral build back that actually adds some minerals back into the water before I drink it. Because other than that, it is just nothing but, like I said, H2O.
So when you see orange sidewalk, what
Iron.
does that tell an agent when they're selling a house?
Typically it tells them there's a well present, and it tells them that there's a lot of iron in the water.
And,
My sidewalks in my house are orange.
Mine too.
and so if you have an iron remover for the outside?
You can, they're very expensive.
It's called reverse osmosis, right?
No.
No, they actually have an iron filter that's not RO.
Okay.
But they're in the $3,000 range.
Yeah, the siding's expensive too.
Yeah. I find that
Just spray it with, iron out.
Simple Green and a power washer does a great job of getting that stuff. Simply Green.
Simple green, simple green.
Simple Green does a great job.
Could you talk about the different kinds of wells? Because I've seen like a pit with bladder tank and above ground pump, like 10 feet down into a pit, and then
Sure.
I've seen just the typical stab wells, which I have for my own lawn irrigation, and then the 4 or 5 inch pipe that goes in, is that pump underground? Is that how that
Correct.
works for those?
Yeah, with the standard system that we have today, there's a well point, there's a screen, a pump, and then the piping up to the wellhead and to the controls. In the old wells and the stab wells, again, there's typically a point, a screen, and then the pump is typically either in the basement or in a well pit. You can get some deeper wells, but typically those are going to be a shallow well type system. Those typically don't produce an awful lot of water because of the smaller pump, and a lot of times because of the smaller pipe. Then you have hand-driven wells, which are, again, a point, a screen, and a pump above ground that you pump by hand.
Like the old ones you see, like, from a
Way
long
back.
time ago?
Yeah.
And then typically with a single wide or double wide trailer, you can have your well tank buried, right? By your well.
Yep.
Those are a little harder for you to inspect also, right?
That makes it very difficult for us to inspect. Yeah, we see a lot of buried tanks.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way, we uncover a lot of buried tanks.
And they're typically a better quality tank, right? So they don't go
Yeah,
bad.
they're designed to be underground.
Right.
But we also find a lot of them underneath trailers.
Yeah.
And it's usually about 50 feet from the entrance to get underneath it. They had to crawl all the way back there to get. We charge extra for those.
Absolutely.
What's the minimum PSI at the highest point in the house?
Good question. Most of them range 60 to 40. Let's put it that way. I mean, you can run them a little bit higher, but you have to check the rating of your pipes. whatever piping system that you have, to see what everything's rated at. 40 to 60, 40 to 70 is what I typically see. I don't typically see it much over that.
What would be the minimum of GPM?
4. That 4 is the absolute minimum. If you have a sprinkler system, probably 8 to 10.
You mean like this kind of sprinkler system
No,
inside the house or
yard.
lawn?
Lawn sprinkling. Yard sprinkling 8 to 10. For a normal system, if you have very small areas that you have for your zones, you can get away with less. You have a groundwater, the other thing that we look for too, is if you have a groundwater heat pump, which I have at my house. My groundwater heat pump takes 10 gallons per minute.
I have that too.
And so I have to make sure that my well is producing probably 12, 13 gallons a minute. So I have an extra large pump, extra large diameter well, and I have 2 65-gallon drawdown tanks.
There was one house a while back, it was one of my sellers, and it was the kind of well that's in a pit that went down, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 feet.
Right.
Pressure tank and everything sitting in there.
Right.
And I wanna say it was like a 2 or 3 inch pipe, Wolf Lake area, older home.
Yep.
Is that kind of standard? Cause a 2 inch pipe seems really small to me.
Yep.
Okay.
I see them. It's usually around cottages.
Okay,
Cottages or old farmhouses, that's kind of typically where we see them.
okay.
What you'll get with a typical stab well, with and I don't know wells, that's his, but I've seen it. You'd have a jet pump, right? That will push water down to bring water back up, right?
I've not seen those, not that they don't exist. Most of them that I see are direct pull. They're
Right.
direct draw.
But those are gonna be a shallow well though.
It's gonna be a shallow.
Right. But if you have water, years ago, they used to use a jet pump that would push water down, because you can only pull water up so high. But you can push water up a long ways, and they didn't have the technology.
That is true. That's why today's wells, the pump's down the bottom of the well.
Right. So if you see a pump that's got all these pipes coming off of it that go
It's gonna be a
down,
shallow well.
it's gonna be complicated.
Right.
Complicated, it's complicated.
They exist, I've never seen one of those.
Oh, really? I had one at my house, we replaced it, yeah, the jet pump. So what it does is it just pushes water down and forces water back.
Is it only one of them?
Is that what they call, mean priming the pump?
No, a pump that's pulling would just have to be primed in general.
It's kind of like fracking.
Yes, right, yeah.
Only we're not getting oil, we're getting water.
He says it as he drinks a drink of water. Good timing there, Chuck.
A little dry. Go ahead.
Boy, this is so much knowledge. Wow.
Yeah, and just one more
Good work.
question, so I had a buyer buy a house, and this is in Muskegon County. Is there a difference between a inspection versus county evaluation? What are the differences? No permit or anything was pulled, it was a county evaluation in lieu of inspection.
When we get out there within 3 days, the county gets out there whenever.
Yeah.
That's one big difference.
Okay.
And that is a big difference between us, and you do have the option of having Kent County do your evaluations, by the way, and your sales.
Yeah.
But they can take up to weeks. Ottawa County, a couple of years ago, was 6 weeks out. Whereas we almost guarantee 3 days. You know, within a week at the most if we're extremely busy. But we get out within a few days. I don't know the difference. Muskegon County, I know we have a tremendous business over there because the county does such a bad job. I guess that's all I can say.
Muskegon County has the sanitarians, and then they have a clerical staff. And the clerical staff, for some reason, it's the easiest county to do an inspection in. Because the clerical staff comes out, all they do is record, to my knowledge. They come and record. They don't really necessarily inspect anything. They just come out and document what you did. Sanitary writes the permit, clerical staff does the inspection. It's a little backwards, I think, and don't hold me to that, but that's how I understand it in Muskegon County.
Yeah, we've run into over there a lot of temporary summer help too.
Yes, right, yes.
Doing inspections in Muskegon County.
One thing I might add is, do you guys, I mean, you ever see you sell vacant land, right? So a vacant land perk tests are a big issue to find out if it's buildable. If you don't have a perk test already done. How, do you know how long a perk test is good for?
I
Does
don't.
anybody know?
Like a year.
A year? Okay. So you're gonna run into that if you sell vacant property. That, in Kent County, as of 2 years ago or 3 years ago, they require a machine excavation perk test, a soil evaluation. A common misconception is a site evaluation is what you need to pull in order to find out if a piece of property perks for a septic system. That is not a permit. That is just something that the county says, yes, you can eventually get a septic system here. So don't confuse a permit with a site eval. Does not mean, and they're only good for a year. I
So you're
think.
still not good to go on that, you gotta, there's other hoops to jump through.
Right, that's what you need in order to be able to get a building permit.
It's a permit to get a permit.
So that's a money grab,
Right.
that's a governmental money grab to get a permit.
Yes, well, they have to go out to the site because they don't know what house you're gonna build, how big it's gonna be, so they gotta go back out there. But all you're doing is finding out where your soil types are, if it's permeable, if it's clay, what kind of system. They are not letting you put this system on a new build. This is a repair build only. So you can't have a clay site. They have to have 2 feet of permeable soil here before they will allow a septic system to go in any property with this style on a new build. So they have 24 inches. Now topsoil is included in that 24 inches. So typically you got 8-10 inches of topsoil up here. And then you have to have the difference in permeable soils, well-drained soils. So if you got a clay site, unless you can do one of these systems, which they don't always grant these on a new build, on a replacement, there's a house there, they have no choice. They have to issue a permit. We'll put in an advanced treatment system, which is very expensive, but we can put them almost in any site. You can't put those on a new build though. Those are, oh no, we don't have any other options, put an advanced treatment system. We're working on one right now in Lincoln Lake through the county. It's called an ATL system, Advanced Treatment from Infiltrator. And it brings our isolation from the seasonal high water table below the ground, it brings it up to 12 inches as opposed to 32 in Kent County. So it's just a pre-treatment system, kind of like it does what sand would do, but it guarantees that it's going to be cleaner. But they're very expensive. I got one was mid-30s. And here's another interesting fact about that one. You know how 50 foot away from the well is our isolation for our tanks? I'm going to be putting tanks about 9 feet from the well. So, the
Because
drain
that's
field,
an advanced system.
because we have no options.
So what is your liability on that?
I have no.
You did not create that.
The customer had to sign a piece of paper saying that they would assume any problems with that well.
The company,
The customer.
the customer.
But then they
The
got a
homeowner.
permit for that?
Yep. That's the weirdest thing I've ever done one. It's gonna be so weird for me putting it in that close to the well, because that's my big thing is 50 foot. Everything is based off of that.
Nate, how was it that we had a drain, I heard you say something about there were 2 failed drain fields on some house you guys were working on, and you had to put in a new drain field. And usually you can go back and forth once you have a second drain field. You never put in a third drain field. You let one rust and heal, and then you go back and forth. But didn't I hear you talk about a third drain field today, or?
I've never put in a third drain field. I'll hook up to the old original drain field and fix it before we put a third one in, unless it was a wheat field full of sand.
Now that one wall we did on 36th Street,
Yeah,
that the original drain field wasn't good, neither was the secondary.
right, right.
What
I
was
don't-
that?
I don't know what they ever did with that, because I never got a call back.
Yeah, I remember it now. So I've put septic systems in, I might put the 5th or 6th, so to say I've never put a third, but, you know, they might have through the years put dry wells in, you know, and it might have got them 5, 7, 10 years. But I've never put a septic system in that had one that was decent, that could be fixed by just rotating it or diverting it to a new one, because they take about 3 years to dry out, I figure. So we put an actual valve that rotates back and
Right,
forth.
so once you have a second drain field, hypothetically, you should be rotating back and forth
Correct.
between the fields every 3 years,
Yep.
hypothetically.
Hypothetically, it doesn't always work. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Big thing I want to leave you with, and I've said this for the last 45 years in the home inspection business, you guys have inspectors going out that you don't know, take the time to go with them. See what they do. Make sure, again, I would make sure they're taking pictures, whether it's a home inspection or whether it's a well and septic, go with them. I know Susan's developing an approved list. As you're developing your list, make sure that somebody goes out with these people. Make sure they know what they're doing. And with your septic pumping, make sure they're actually pumping the tanks.
That's the biggie.
And ask question.
Ask questions. Yeah.
You can always call me if you have a question in regards to septic. So I know I didn't bring any business.
Yeah,
cards.
that was.